friends, I'm Joy Chu, a former scientist turned content creator, and the goal of my YouTube channel is to help home cooks become more confident with science. Have you ever stopped by a grocery store baking aisle and wondered why there's so many different kinds of sugars? Instead of just plain white or brown, you've got muscovado, powdered, turbinado, castor, light brown, and the list goes on. And on top of that, sugar comes in solid crystal and liquid form. In today's video, I'm going to demystify all of these types and share important tips for using different sugars. So without further ado, let's dive in. In order to talk about all of these different sugars, we have to revisit some basic questions. What is sugar and how is it made? First, sugar is a carbohydrate that takes on different forms. You might have heard of the words glucose or fructose, which are simple sugars. If you take simple sugars and string them together, you get a compound sugar. Your typical table sugar is sucrose, which is a compound sugar made of glucose and fructose. When you evaporate a solution containing sucrose in water, the glucose and fructose molecules become closely packed together to form crystals. But if you break down this glucose-fructose structure using heat, acid, or enzymes, you stop crystallization and you get something called an invert sugar. Unlike your typical table sugar, invert sugars come in a sticky liquid form. Now, the second important thing to talk about is how packaged sugar gets made. I'm going to focus on cane sugar because it's most commonly used for home baking. Here's the process in broad strokes. After the juice is extracted from the sugarcane plant, it's boiled down into a mixture of sugar crystals and a dark brown syrup called molasses. What manufacturers categorize as unrefined, raw, or refined are basically labels to identify how much of the original molasses remains with the crystals. Unrefined means that the sugar is very minimally processed so that it retains basically all of its original molasses. An easy way to tell if a sugar is unrefined is that it's usually dark brown or comes in chunky blocks. This Japanese black sugar that I have on hand, called kokudo, is an example of unrefined cane sugar, along with others like muscovado and jaggery. Raw is more processed to get rid of most of the original molasses. You'll notice that raw sugars like turbinado and organic brown sugar are usually light to medium brown in color and somewhat coarse. Refined is highly processed so that all of the original molasses is stripped away. Anything that's white is refined, such as granulated and powdered sugar. And as I mentioned in my last video, a lot of brown sugars that you buy at the store count as refined. Unless labeled as natural or organic, light and dark brown sugars are white sugar that has molasses added back in. Now, within the refined category, you might be wondering what the differences are among granulated, castor, and powdered sugar. This is just different sizes of the grain, with granulated being coarser than castor, which is coarser than powdered. Additionally, powdered sugar contains corn or tapioca starch to keep the sugar from clumping together. Okay, I know I just threw a ton of information out there, so let's sort through and see what all of this means for baking. First, different sugars have different amounts of molasses, which can change the taste and texture of your food. More molasses means more caramelization, moisture, and leavening. Second, in terms of nutrients, unrefined cane sugars have the most minerals out of all the types. The average light and dark brown sugars you get at the store are highly processed, so they're actually not as healthy as you might think. Third, the size of the sugar crystals you use translates to the texture of your food. Coarse is more difficult to dissolve, which gives a more craggy, grainy texture. On the other hand, finer sugars like powdered or castor will dissolve better, which means a smoother texture. If you want a sugar with a finer texture, you can always pulse coarser granules in a food processor, or use an invert sugar for the smoothest texture. Fourth, a fancy term you might hear is hygroscopic, which basically describes how much something attracts water. Different sugars have different hygroscopic levels, with granulated being the least hygroscopic, brown sugar more hygroscopic, and invert sugars the most hygroscopic. Using more hygroscopic sugars will give you more moist, more chewy, and softer baked goods. Whew! I've covered a lot about sugar today, but if there's anything about sugar that you want to learn more about, feel free to suggest topics in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to the channel below. For a more detailed comparison between granulated sugar and brown sugar, You'll definitely want to check out the video that I've linked up top. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all later.
So long.